Hello, I am back, and today I wanted to talk about saving, which is not a super sexy topic, but it is really important as a foundation for your financial future. So the concept of saving is really simple, but a lot of people find it a little bit more difficult to put into practice. And so in this video, what I wanted to talk about is why you should save and also how to go about it in an efficient way that avoids some of the normal pitfalls that we all face when it comes to saving. So building up a financial nest egg is really great because it allows you to weather some of the storms that life throws at you, whether that is a unexpected vet's bill for your cat, let's say, which you wouldn't be able to pay if all your cash was tied up in investments. You know, you don't want to be in a position where all of your savings are in investments, which then crash and suddenly you have no money. So boring but necessary is the main message. They are a super important first step, and that's why I think it's worth making a video on it. So here we go. Pay yourself first is the first concept that I wanted to talk about. The idea behind this is that instead of waiting for the end of the month and using whatever is left over to go into savings, automate your savings and get them out of your bank account and into a savings account as early as possible. So if you're paid monthly, you want that automated transaction to go out at the beginning of the month. So the idea with this is that we are all subject to something called present bias, which means that we value smaller rewards now over larger rewards in the future. This is one of the reasons that it can be so difficult to put a big chunk of cash into your savings when you're faced with a whole bunch of exciting things to spend money on. So automating the transaction, sending it out first thing after you get paid, that's one great way to avoid present bias. Another thing that automating your savings does is that it prevents you from some of those subconscious habits that you might have, because apart from these biases that all of our brains are subject to, we also all have really deep-rooted narratives around money. And so it's not impossible that you may be subconsciously sabotaging yourself, particularly if you have a narrative that doesn't serve you. So for example, something like, I'm never going to be rich anyway, so what is the point in saving? You know, if you don't believe that it's possible, then what is the point? You kind of have to fight with these kind of feelings a little bit, and automating just makes that fight a little bit less difficult. So the idea with paying yourself first is to prioritize saving and to treat it in the same way that you treat your other fixed expenses. So your rent, your mortgage repayments, your food bills, those are things that most of us, we know that they're important, and so we don't spend that money. And this is how you should treat your savings as well. The other thing about it, paying yourself first and sending it to a savings account, is it flips the dynamic a little bit when you are deciding how to spend your money, and it forces you to be a bit more proactive about it. So when you're just spending money and waiting to see what happens at the end, that's easy, you're just spending money. Whereas if the money has already left your account and is sitting in a savings account, you then have to be very conscious about whether you are going to take money out of that savings account and spend it on something that you may or may not really want. Not totally bomb-proof, but a good place to start. Short-term rainy day fund. This is the first place I wanted to start when it comes to the types of savings that you want to be looking at. So if you're starting from zero, the idea with a rainy day fund is that it is the most important kind of savings that you should have. It is 3 to 6 months worth of your salary or living expenses. So whatever you believe is the minimum you need to live every month, you need to save that amount for the equivalent of 3 to 6 months. This is what I have saved up, and it really makes me feel pretty relaxed in times that have otherwise been very stressful. And so that's actually a really good example of why it's important to have this money saved. Firstly, there is a huge amount of psychological security that comes with having a savings pot tucked away. You know, and when you're a bit more psychologically calm, like life just feels better, And B, you're able to make much more like level-headed decisions for yourself and your future. There's also the super practical ability to be able to pay for stuff when things do go wrong. Like I mentioned the cat's bill already. I recently had to pay for a car repair, which was hella pricey. And if I didn't have savings, it would have been... Right, the other thing is that you need to have separate savings for different goals. How like nitpicky you get with this is up to you, and you hopefully know yourself better or best. But the idea is that you keep your rainy day fund separate from other things that you might be saving for. So generally speaking, it pays literally to investigate savings accounts and figure out what's going to work best, especially if you can get a higher interest rate on a different kind of savings account as opposed to your current account, for example. But yeah, the idea is that your long-term savings definitely need to be in a high interest savings account, because the idea is that you are not dipping into that very often. So it's going to grow, and if you can get a higher savings rate on it, that's better, obviously. But then for short-term savings, for example, if you are going on holiday, you don't want to accidentally be dipping into your rainy day fund to pay for your holiday. So I found it really helpful to be very black and white about what I'm saving for and where I'm saving it. That's what's worked for me. Finally, I wanted to talk about pension, because this one is probably the hardest and the easiest simultaneously to get your head around. It's one of those things that everybody knows is really important, but again, present bias comes into it. There's also another thing called discounting, which is where we are kind of unable to value the needs and desires of our future self because there is a lack of continuity. If I try and imagine 80-year-old me, it feels like a completely different person, and that makes it much harder to be like, 80-year-old Catherine is gonna need money and she's gonna want this kind of lifestyle. And yeah, those are the reasons that make it much harder to spend money that you have now by putting it into a pension pot that you are not going to see for 30, 40, 50 years, depending on how old you are. But the value of starting sooner rather than later is that A, 80-year-old you is going to be financially secure, but also B, over the longer term, compounding works in your favor. So the sooner you start, the less you need to contribute monthly. So for example, if you start when you're 20, investing £25 for 30 years, you're gonna get better, or at the very least the same returns as someone who invests 100 for 10 years. So yeah, try to think of your future self, apply the same logic, automated savings into your pension, and if you're in a situation where your employer is able to make a contribution towards your pension, take it, because that is free money and your 80-year-old self will thank you for it. So that is my very top level lowdown on saving. Whenever I start talking about these topics, I realize that I am only just scratching the surface and that there is so much more that I could talk about. In the meantime, I'm going to stop in the interest of brevity and ask away. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments, and of course, like the video, subscribe to the video, and thank you for watching.